we're ready. I think we're ready to go.
All right, it is 7 o'clock. We will go ahead and call this meeting to order on May 10th, Tuesday, 2022. First item on the agenda is approval of the April 12th minutes. Do we have any motions to approve the minutes?
I would move with one minor correction. The minutes have me adjourning the meeting, or calling the meeting to order, I mean. I guess we're just used to that, so that needs to be changed. But with that small correction, I would move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Joe, for your motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Lee. We have a second. Passed. And moving on to the council liaison report. Tom, will you please do the honors?
Yeah, the city council meeting went fairly well. There was the discussion and appeal of the Ashdown School, and the appeal was upheld. In other words, they overturned the planning and zoning approval of that, and primarily it was due to the extra employees that would have been hired. So they felt that that was a violation of the existing ordinance and was outside the bounds, as well as there was a considerable amount of community opposition to it. So that was primarily it, and that took up 99% of the meeting. So then that was it. Anybody have any questions on it as far as? No? Okay, that was it. Yep, thank you.
All right. Next item on the list is our open forum. If you're not currently on the agenda but would like to come forth to speak, we can open the forum number 1. All right. Please state your name and address.
Joe Doty, 30718 Rice Creek Drive. I'm here just to ask your consideration in something from I was here at the last meeting for the Ashdown that got overturned, and there was a lot of community support against that, and it was approved anyways through this board, and I completely understand your choice to approve as you see fit. But some of our neighbors, and myself especially, felt that our issues that were brought up were not really considered by the board. There was very little discussion. I think there was probably 8 or 10 of us that got up and spoke and raised some pretty decent, in my mind, objections to the application. And I just kind of felt like we weren't really listened to. There was no response to the things that we brought up to speak of. It felt to us as a rush to an approval after everyone spoke. And I completely understand you can run this committee however you see fit, but I think from a public standpoint, we might have felt better if there was some discussion that was going on that would have led us to understand how the decision was arrived at that you were going to approve. It kind of felt like we were slighted, like there was, yeah, we heard you, but we don't really care what you have to say. We're going to do this and we're just going to get it done. If there would have been maybe some discussion amongst you explaining as to why our points weren't valid, that you didn't agree with what we were saying, it might have made us at least understand a little bit better. You know, myself, my main point when I got up here was the home occupation and the lack of employees. And I think I actually fairly forcefully said, you know, you can't approve this based on how you've written the home occupation as it is. And when it was over and you got time to vote, there was really no discussion of that. You just went right to vote. It's like, I kind of felt it was a pretty valid point. It's the way your ordinances are written and you went against it. And I guess as a citizen, as a tax-paying citizen here, I would like to have had some discussion, maybe a little bit better understanding of how we arrived at that decision. And my second point, when Jerry puts together a list of findings of facts, it would be beneficial to the public and the audience if maybe you would consider going over those findings of facts, discussing them. I think there was 6 or so. Maybe line by line, saying, okay, this is Jerry's finding of fact. Do we believe this is a finding of fact, or do we not? Why or why not do we feel that way? Again, as a public member here, it kind of felt like these were Jerry's findings of facts, which they're fine, that's his opinion, but it would have been nice maybe as a board to discuss those when we kind of brought up some of the points that maybe those weren't really findings of facts. So I guess what I'm requesting is maybe you would consider going down the line items of findings of facts and having a little discussion amongst yourselves so that we as citizens understand better how you're making these decisions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Doty. Any comments from the commission that you'd like to share? All right, thank you. Moving on to, is there anyone else for public forum number 1? All right, then we'll close public forum number 1 and we'll move on to public hearing to consider the variance application V 2022-001 for Ann and Scott Miller of 32566 South Bay Lane in Breezy Point. Application is to increase the size of legal non-conforming use, addition to dwelling and attached garage. So we will open the public hearing and at this time, if anyone would like to come up for the applicant presentation to kind of walk us through, we would appreciate it if you'd like to. And please identify yourself and your address.
My name is Ann Miller. This is my husband, Scott, and we have, it's currently our cabin at 32566 South Bay Lane in Breezy Point in the very near future. If this is approved, this will be our homestead, and we have made application for a variance to basically remodel the existing non-conforming cabin, add a small breezeway with attached garage. We had completed initially, the initial survey demonstrated that we needed to increase the setback from the lake to conform to the 75-foot ordinary high watermark setback, and then also conform to the impervious surface. So now, with the revised site survey, site plan, we are now in compliance of those 2 components, and we are asking for approval to move forward with that site plan for the addition and remodel.
Are there any questions at this time from the commission?
So the existing house and porch will just be remodeled,
Yes,
like new foundation type remodeling? Or really?
yep,
So you mean tore down then?
No.
No?
No, I want to try to repurpose as much there as possible, the structure, keep it the same footprint.
Okay.
But I already have, I talked with a house mover, plan on jacking it up so we can get underneath it, dig and put footings in. I was talking to the inspector about, it's all gonna be a home, I want to make sure that it's structurally sound. So just dig down, put frost footings in, come out of the ground, set the cabin back down, add on to the, with the breezeway, is gonna come a mechanical room, because it's kind of, just with my layout that I have, it's a little bit small, but put all the mechanicals in there, the furnace, electrical, and then add that garage also, so that we can pull into the garage and walk right into the house, and, so it's all gonna be back on one level, but it'll have a foundation, down below frost footing, so that it won't heave or anything like that, so
So the porch that's on there now will be
convert it into
living area.
living area.
a living area?
Yep.
And then the garage, will that have a loft, the new garage?
No.
No?
Nope, just regular, yep, just a single story.
Where's the septic? Is it,
The one that's there right now, the tank is, I think there's already a tank, is it on the drawings? The tank is right set behind the cabin, like close to the road by these trees. That's where the tank is.
So,
Where the proposed driveway, right there, a little
Yeah.
bit below that, somewhere right there is the tank right now. And then the drain field is actually up by where the new garage is built. But it's, right now too, I'm waiting on getting a septic design too, because I know we gotta do a complete the septic design, to make sure that it's gonna work for season, for, permanent use. Because I think it's just probably a seasonal type septic back when it was put in. Because
Probably
the
just
tank
the-
is pretty,
Yep,
it's
so
not
we'll
so
have to
warm.
upgrade the septic.
Yeah, so I've got that.
So that's a county thing, right, Jerry? The septic? The septic, we don't deal with the septic.
State, I believe.
That's a county, state,
It's licensed through the county.
right.
Yeah, so that's in the works, I'm just waiting on.
So a well must be around there too someplace, huh?
Wells on the back, yeah, I can see a bump, it says bump out to be removed, that's just, it's a sand point.
Oh, okay.
On the point on the septic, have you gotten far enough along in there to know that there is space on the lot and how that would work with where the garage is and everything, that you're comfortable knowing that if we did move forward with this, that there is adequate space for it?
I had Josh Dingman out to look at it, and we kind of went over it, and he's proposing, he's not a designer, but he proposed that, yeah, the tank would go in the new area, give or take a little bit, but then the drain field would go back up towards the back part of the property off that adjacent part of the garage, probably a pressure bed system. So I've been just waiting on that. Hopefully in a week or so, he's gonna do that.
That'd be the good thing, you'd get a new sewer.
What's that?
That'd be good, you'd be getting a new septic.
Yeah, I want to
Further
make sure,
from the
like we
lake.
said, we want to make this our home, so we want to make sure we don't have any problems. Hopefully alleviate any problems, but yeah, get the tank down deep, get a big enough tank, because we'll be doing laundry and everything up here, so.
So I see on the impervious, it's gravel is gravel impervious?
Yes.
Class 5.
I have a problem with that, but whatever.
Well, as long as we're in the compliance
Right, that's
portion,
not an issue.
that's
I'm-
probably our biggest
Yeah, we got
obstacle.
some adjustments to get there, so.
Yeah, they have, no, whatever. Yeah, so you're well within a 0.3% there, so you're good.
Do you feel you have a good well?
No, we're gonna get a deep well.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, yep. I got bids on a lot of that stuff. I kind of put numbers together over the winter just to make sure, just get a good plan together so that when these questions come up, I can do that. But yeah, definitely have a good new well. But he didn't know where to put that until he knows where the septic design is also. So I'm assuming it's gonna be towards the other neighbor's, property. It seemed like everybody else has the same well company, that's along our road there. So it'll be back a ways. It's gotta be, I think it's, I can't remember what the setback is, 50 feet or something from the tank, I believe, so. But yeah, he wants to see that design first before he spots the well, so.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yes, so you guys have that garage on the other side of the road, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It's kind of a shop, I think, kind of hobby guy, so, yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions at this time?
Does that, Jerry, does that, with the garage that they have now, would that conflict with, if they want to put another garage there?
No, they're allowed an accessory structure.
Okay.
As long as they add it to the house, it isn't considered an accessory structure.
So it would be detached?
Correct.
All right, we may call you back up as we have more questions.
Okay.
Great.
And we'll move on to staff review.
Again, the applicant is Ann and Scott Miller. Legal description is the north 100 feet to the south 200 of Government Lot 5, Section 3. The address is 32566 South Bay Lane. The zoning of the property is R2 on Seward. The applicable codes are 153.007, 153.032, and 153.120. Request is for an expansion of a legal non-conforming use, which is a dwelling unit, an addition to the dwelling unit, and an additional attached garage. The addition to the dwelling unit 6 by 14 and the attached garage 24 by 30. The property is located at 32566 South Bay. It is lakeshore property on Lake Osawatomie. The lot is 20,269 square feet. The lot currently hosts an existing dwelling and a detached garage. The existing cabin or dwelling was built in 1980, sometimes around that. The existing cabin is 20 by 38. There was an additional porch, which is 12 by 24. Was that was built with a variance that was granted in 1991. And the detached garage, which is a 30 by 40, was built in 2018. The cabin or the dwelling is 57 feet plus or minus from the OHW. The fact that it's less than 75 feet from the OHW makes that a legal non-conforming use. Legal non-conforming use cannot be expanded without a variance. Again, the Millers are seeking to construct a 6 by 14 addition and a 24 by 36 attached garage. The proposed additions to the cabin are proposed to conform to the 75-foot OHW setback. The variance is a legally permitted deviation as provided by MS 462.357 subdivision 6 as it may be amended from time to time from the provisions of this chapter as deemed necessary by the Board of Adjustment when the strict interpretation of the ordinance would create practical difficulties and be impractical because of circumstances relating to lot size, shape, topography, or other characteristics of the property. And when the deviation from the ordinance with any attached conditions will still be in keeping with the spirit and the intent of the ordinance. Variances cannot create a land use not permitted in a zone. Variances shall be decided within a reasonable time within considerations for the following. A strict interpretation of the ordinance would be impractical because of circumstances relating to lot size, shape, topography, or other physical characteristics of the property not created by the landowner. A deviation from the ordinance with any attached conditions will still be in keeping with the spirit and the intent of the ordinance. The land use created by the variance is permitted in the zoning district where the property is located. The variance will not alter the essential character of the locality, and the variance is not for economic reasons alone, but reasonable use of the property does not exist under the ordinance. Again, findings. The applicant intends that the practical difficulty is, I think it's up to the applicant to provide you with the practical difficulty. The addition conforms to the 75-foot OHW setback. The use is consistent with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. Their proposed impervious coverage is less than 25%. The following may be used to support denial of a variance request. The Planning Commission Board of Adjustment finds no practical difficulty. Reasonable use of the property exists under current conditions. The following finding of fact may be used to support approval of the variance. The property pre-exists subdivision and zoning regulations. The proposed additions conform to setback requirements. The impervious coverage does not exceed 25%. Potential actions: deny the request approve the request to increase the volume of legal non-conforming use. The one other thing that I didn't put in the report, is somewhat confusing, is that road that goes between the existing house and the newer garage that was built in 2018 is actually an easement per se, and it's a prescriptive easement based on the use that's there. It is still part of their property. I'm told that area at one time, there was a proposed subdivision that never got filed, but people just bought lots, and the road was something that was there and used as an easement. So it's basically a prescriptive easement only. We wouldn't have any setback requirements from that roadway, because it's private property. Again, there's some common sense that goes into being that close to a road too, and you got to accept the fact that snowplows and those type of things, there is some potential damage that comes with that, but that's beyond our control.
Thank you, Jerry. Any questions for Jerry from the commission?
Yes, that's not plowed by the city, is it?
It is.
It is, okay. But it's still considered a private,
Still considered a private roadway.
okay.
And the city plows it?
Yes, we do.
Is that part of that same thing up on Timberline Point?
Well, part of Timberline Point was actually vacated, and there's a
Right,
same
yeah.
type of situation exists as far as property ownership is concerned.
Right, that's what I was getting at, is,
But it's traditionally been plowed by the city forever.
it's one of those anomalies that's really nice to have in Breezy Point.
Somebody pays for it though.
Madam Chairman, before we go to public input, could we have the applicant tell us what the practical difficulty is?
Absolutely. Would you please come, would you be willing to come up and share some more for us?
I guess we haven't discovered that there was, aside from the roadway going directly through our property, we felt that we've met the setback requirement and the percentage of impervious surface, and the biggest practical difficulty exists with that roadway going directly through the property. Whereas if that did not exist, and if it was similar to O'Donnell Drive, where their road kind of comes on the backside, as you come down South Bay Lane, our parcel and our two neighboring parcels are kind of shrunk. On the lakeside area, the size of the parcel in area reduces in size for not just our property, but the two neighboring properties. And so with that roadway in between there, seems to be our biggest obstacle as far as a practical difficulty. But again, we've met the setback requirement as well as percentage of impervious surface, so.
Yeah, we had, what's the gal's name from the
Oh.
county?
We did meet with, I did meet with Crow Wing County Soil and Water, and so we have developed a plan for the proper stormwater management. And so we have 2 rain gardens that will exist. I don't know if you bring up the map one more time. I can kind of give you an idea of where they will be placed.
Trying to help manage.
The stormwater management. So if you take a look in front of the proposed garage, it says the actual wording of proposed addition and then the 75-foot setback. So right in between there, she has identified a rain garden area. And then another one exists on south side of the property as you're coming down towards, in that area, yeah. Again, there's another further in front of the yard. The lakeside, I say front, I mean the lakes. Sorry, yeah, so in that area. So she's got a couple of rain gardens developed to help with that proper stormwater management.
So I have a question. Because one of the requirements for a variance is that practical difficulty, I'm not confident yet we've got a good feeling for that. If this wasn't approved, what would be the practical difficulty with not having that garage there?
Just, so to add the garage itself,
I guess I don't know.
you know, the whole.
I've never
reason-
gone through that process, so I'm
The
not
reason,
quite sure.
yeah, I want, the footprint is only, I think the footprint's about 1,200 square feet, if you put it all
Less
together,
than.
the front porch and everything. Kind of a small footprint, matches the rest of the properties on that side of the lake. I wanted to add once we add to the existing structure that's too close to the lake, then that's why we're applying for the variance, because we're attaching to it. If we didn't attach to it and we set back, we wouldn't even have to have the variance itself. But to squeeze all that stuff into the property, the mechanical room, I was just trying to find a good reason for that. That's why we thought the little breezeway, and then add that garage. More of a convenience to get from the garage into the house, as snow and you get older, that sort of thing. That's what I was looking for, try to make it more convenient for us with that. So if we didn't get approved, we could always push the garage back and not have that there, and then I'd just have to redesign the inside of the house and try to fit the mechanicals into the cabin. And just apply for, I guess, what I need a variance to do a remodel on that house, Terry?
No, as long as you're not expanding the footprint.
Yep.
Expanding the legal non-conforming use.
Right.
There is I think the problem with the new garage, from a square footage standpoint, it's acceptable if it's attached. If you were to propose another detached garage, that would not be acceptable because he's already filled up his quota with the existing detached garage.
Okay,
Okay,
got it.
so it sounds like
So,
that would
yes.
be the practical.
So the only way to add more garage space is to attach it to the house.
Okay.
So, yeah,
The
more-
house and the porch is the problem. I mean, the new garage and breezeway is 75 feet off, so that's,
The new addition totally adheres to setbacks.
Right.
It's there's no issue there. It's just the fact that it is an existing structure that is considered a legal non-conforming use, and in order to expand a legal non-conforming use, a variance must be acquired.
So if I understand this correctly, there really isn't a practical difficulty because we're meeting all the setbacks, correct?
That's the way I understood it anyway.
If we're meeting all the setbacks, the only reason they need the variance is because it's a non-conforming structure.
It's expansion of a non-conforming.
Actually, if it's not, so if in the variance therefore would be technical in nature, and there really isn't a practical difficulty due to the land, the lot, et cetera, correct?
No, they have room to
Right.
do what they're
So I
planning on
guess
doing. It's
the way
just-
the way I see it is, yeah, they need a variance, but there really isn't a practical difficulty because they're meeting all the setbacks. So it's technical in nature. It's not really a physical thing, correct?
I don't know how to take that, Tom.
So the practical difficulty might be said the fact that it is a legal, non-conforming.
Right, that's
the practical
that's the practical difficulty. And the only reason you need the variance is because it is that. Yeah, I was looking at this earlier, and I'm trying to figure out what is the practical difficulty associated with the land, in other words, the lot, the land, et cetera, okay? And there really isn't one, because they meet all the setbacks. So it's technical in nature. That's the way I'm looking at it, but I don't have a vote, so.
Road kind of changes that whole setback thing, so.
Yeah, we'd have some real setback issues if that road were dedicated roadway.
Right.
It's very similar to Hilltop Drive and on
Hilltop and Timberlane Point,
and Timberline Point.
yeah.
So from a commission standpoint, does anyone have questions or thoughts as we go through these findings? I like the idea of spending some more time going through these just to educate. So for that practical difficulty, is there any debate, discussion, thoughts on that being, the difficulty being that it's simply a non-conforming lot and that's the difficulty that they have to overcome?
Well, like Tom says, not really a difficulty, it's, it's all been approved, the porch, the house is all, as long as they don't pick it up, move it 10 feet closer to the lake.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Jerry and I actually, something to think about for the commission. Jerry and I actually had a little discussion this morning about nonconformities, not specifically this case, just a general discussion about nonconformities. And one thing to think about is, again, when it comes to a nonconformity, long-term, generally the intent is to get rid of the nonconformity. When something is zoned, the zoning changes, it becomes a legal nonconforming use. You can use it because it existed before, but the intent is long-term to get rid of that use. In this situation, it's not the use that's not nonconforming. The use is, as Jerry pointed, it's a residential district, it's a residential house, and I think the city's intent would be to want to keep it. So that might be something to consider too, is again, the nonconforming piece here is not the use. It's just, again, it's that structure. The structure was built before the shoreland ordinance was enacted. And so maybe that's not something to think about is, again, what is the city's intent here? Is the city's intent to want the structure to be removed and rebuilt to conform, or allow it to be improved for the greater good of the city? So that's something to think about as well.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I constantly give a lot of thought to, we've dealt with many of these, we're going to deal with many more, cabins becoming homesteads. And I think you're absolutely right. It's not the city's intent for people not to be able to have that become their homestead.
Back in the day, you couldn't even take one of these non-conforming things and expand them and/or, if it were destroyed, build them. There was some special legislation that came in about 2010 that allowed them to be rebuilt on the same footprint.
It seems to me as long as we're conforming to the setbacks, especially the ordinary high water mark, it's in our interest for this to become a homestead.
Yeah, before I knew that was a private road, I was totally confused by it, but now it makes sense, so, for me.
Any other discussion? Thank you.
Tom,
Yes.
did you have something, Tom?
Not really, I was just gonna say, there was a house on County Road 4, Christensen's house, that they were started to ask for variances, and it was gonna get kind of complicated. And they did the economic analysis showing that it was, they could get a much larger house and meet all the setbacks. So, I don't know if you've done the economic analysis to say, level what is there and build new, meeting all the setbacks.
I think the overall cost of construction currently would exceed.
That's, I guess that's, if, I don't know if you're familiar with there's a house right on County Road 4, just as you're coming into Breezy Point. Really wide house, but it's it's a very shallow lot. And that was a house that they wanted to remodel, and the variances that they had to get, as well as how much it was going to cost them to remodel it, they elected to just bulldoze it and then build from scratch, and they met all the setbacks. And so, I mean, there was a lot of people that called the city and said, how come they're building this huge house in this small lot? But they met all the setbacks, and it was.
This is the same story height as
Yeah.
well, so it conforms with the neighboring properties. So as far as.
I mean, I'm just asking the question,
Okay.
Just wanted to work with what we have. Kind of put a good plan together, so.
Just a comment.
If it's demolished, is it no longer a non-conforming structure?
Pardon?
If it's demolished, is it no longer a non-conforming structure?
If it's demolished, then they could rebuild on the same footprint. And it would still be considered a non-conforming
It still
structure.
would be, okay.
But if they demolished it and built on a footprint that met all of the setbacks, then it would be no longer non-conforming.
It's a different story,
It's a
yes.
different story, yes. No longer non-conforming, which was what Christensen's did.
But Jerry, if
That
they-
had other issues other than
Well,
just
yes,
that.
yeah, I know, but that's,
And I don't think money was the issue.
well, yeah, that was another story altogether, but.
so,
I think another thing you could also think about is on the demolishing route, is with what they have now, you could ask yourself, could they demolish what they have now, rebuild exactly what they have now, and still meet setbacks? And that could also ask that question again. I have not done the analysis that Jerry has, but that is something that I look at it, and you talk about once you talk about things that you talked about earlier, like where's your septic gonna go, where's your drain field gonna go? If they took the existing house and moved it to meet setbacks, there's that question of, well, where would that other stuff go? And then would this lot even be developable at that point, with what they have now?
But at this point, I don't think we want to reinvent the wheel.
Anything else before we close the public hearing portion?
Did you get through the whole list of things?
We can do that. So we did talk about how it conforms, item number 2 on the findings, to the 75-foot setback. It's considered consistent with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. Does anyone have comments on that? We didn't really talk about it, but I would say I drove by there and it seemed consistent to my nature.
yeah, I agree.
And then the last was impervious coverage. We covered that with the 24.7. It's within the range needed. Any other points to consider for findings?
So on the sewer, depending on what happens with that, being that it's a private road, would there be any issue if it had to be moved closer to the road, or they still have to conform with the setbacks as far as like property lines?
The only setback they would have to worry about is property line setbacks.
Do you think it'd be useful?
And they'd be far enough away from the lake.
And
Yeah.
the setback from the lake and setback from property lines.
Okay.
All right, then going through just kind of that final piece, we do have findings in here that support the approval of the variance, and we also listed some that would potentially choose not to. So as Jerry pointed out, there were 3 items that could be used to support the variance. Those findings included that the property pre-exists subdivision and zoning regulations. Number 2, that the proposed additions conform to the setbacks, which we've talked about, and that the impervious coverage does not exceed 25%. Is there any additional discussion on those items? Yes, Jerry?
I didn't include it, but you could include the rain gardens and
Yeah.
stormwater management.
Because many times that's a condition.
Many times it is, yes.
Anyone else have findings that would support approval of it?
The rain guard or the garden, is that like a tiling or something that the county does to?
Typically, it's a
divert?
depression that's planted. It's
Oh,
a
okay, got
living
you.
garden that catches the rain and cleanses or catches the groundwater, cleanses the groundwater before it gets released into the subsurface and or the lake.
Okay.
All right, and then we have actions that we can take, which would be number 1, to deny the request, or to approve request to increase the volume of non-conforming use. So we would discuss that further in the actual official action, but is there any more discussion that we want to add to that? All right, then let's close the public hearing portion and move on to the official action for this variance. Do we have any motions at this time to consider?
Did we do public input?
I thought we did.
I'm not sure if we,
All right, well, let me reopen the hearing for a moment just to see if there's any other public input. All right, we'll officially close that and then move to official action variance. Is there any motions at this time to consider?
I would make a motion to approve it with the 4 items that Jerry stated and you had stated. And the rain garden being the number 4 and add it to it, so.
So to list those out to just make sure I'm understanding that motion correctly, the motion would be to approve it under the following findings of number 1, the property pre-exists subdivision and zoning. Number 2, the proposed additions to conform to setback requirements. Number 3, the impervious coverage does not exceed 25%. And number 4, that there is rain gardage and stormwater management processes in place or proposed. Is there any other discussion on that? Do we have a second for that motion?
I second that motion.
Lee seconded that motion. Any further discussion? Let's take a vote on that then. All in favor, say aye.
I,
Any not in favor? All right, the motion is passed. All right, then moving on to number G on the agenda, which is the discussion, City Council's direction on the home occupation licensed daycare facility. So Jerry, can you lead us through that?
I'll try. One of the things that the city council identified was they wanted the planning commission to look at the ordinance to see what additions, modifications, subtractions could be utilized in order to allow and/or not allow daycare centers in residential neighborhoods. Tom, if I've got this wrong, just,
No, you're heading down the right path.
I think the message that I heard was that although they denied the or they rescinded the planning commission action. I think they identified that there's a need for this type of daycare and wanted to make sure that it could be in place someplace in Breezy Point. And I bring this to you tonight only as a preempt to maybe next month you're going to be talking about some ways that it could be modified. But as I see it, Dave and I will probably bring you some recommendations and or some proposals. Probably won't be recommendations right away, but something to look at and bounce off you. But I think the council recognized that there was a need, but where and how. Is that close, Tom?
Yes. Yeah, there was definitely a need, and because the ordinance specifically stated that the home occupation is by the people living there, in other words, no outside employees. They felt that was the technical violation that caused them to rescind what had been approved.
I have a question on that. So they had, I don't know if anyone recalls when this happened, but they had a approval to put up the first yurt and have that homeschool happening. Were there employees at that time that were part of that?
The proposal was, that we approved, was to add non-family employees. It was 4 or 6?
6, I believe.
6 employees, yeah. And that was one of the conditions, is that they could have 6 employees.
It said 3 to 4 in the minutes.
Was it 3 to 4? I don't remember what it was.
2 plus, 4 plus the 2. And
Oh, okay.
Yes, that was it. And that's where the city council fit, that was the technical violation, and they didn't, and that's why they rescinded it. So what the direction was to review the ordinance as well as review other ordinances, but specifically on this one, to review the ordinance to see if that could be modified, or if you want to leave it stand. I think that's what's kind of the gist of it. There was so much going on at that point, I guess I kind of lost track.
I'm hoping that what I just told you was
Yeah.
what I was hearing.
Right.
So am I hearing correctly that the city council would be okay with a daycare operation classified as an in-home daycare operation with no employees?
Well, I believe there's another thing that gets involved with daycares. There's a licensing criteria through the county
Exactly.
and the Minnesota Department of Health, I believe.
I was just going to say, if that's the case, you've pretty much eliminated any possibility of in-home.
Well, the licensing goes, you need a license after 1. If you're taking care of your own, you don't need a license, or if you're taking care of your own for only 30 days in a year, you don't need that. And it's a relative, you don't need the license. Grandparents qualify.
Right.
If you're going to take care of more than 1, then you need a license. You only need yourself to take care of. Don't take this as gospel, but up to 14, you can do it with the 2 people in the household. Once it gets past 14, then you need so many extra helpers. So 14 is kind of the cutoff that the county uses and the state uses to license daycare centers. And the more kids that you have, the more help you need to take care of those kids.
Isn't there a definition isn't a home daycare distinguished from a group daycare?
A home daycare is, our ordinance right now allows up to 12 in a home without any permits whatsoever from the city. They still need a daycare license in order to do that
Correct,
and charge for it.
correct.
And-
So beyond that, if there were more children in that home, it would need an employee, it would need
Yes.
someone else.
Yes,
And it would seem to me that begins to define it as a group daycare.
that's not how the license works, but the license is a C3 license is my understanding, up to 14 kids. Anything over 14 is a different license with different requirements. The conflict with the license and our existing ordinance is the difference between 12 and 14. That's a conflict as far as the license is concerned. But there's really not a definition in the ordinance that defines daycare either. It's kind of like daycare is taking care of kids, little kids.
I think that's the fundamental problem.
There's nothing there that says what a daycare is.
And then I think the other challenge is many times a daycare isn't conducive to commercial property. Many times you don't want children in a commercial setting.
I think you see, I think if you run around the country, you see quite a bit of that happen.
Oh, you do.
Quite frankly.
Yeah, you do.
What's the little people up here?
Yeah.
Is that the name of it? Little
Yeah.
People has, I think they're licensed up to 90. And that's a commercial area.
But I guess what I'm saying is if we don't want daycare in a residential area, any daycare in a residential area, I think we've created a real problem.
Yeah, and that really wasn't what they were arguing. The fact that under our ordinance, if it's just the home occupants that are doing the daycare, okay, that would be a home occupation. The fact that they would be hiring extra staff to handle the extra people, now there was a way of, or it was being looked at as it's no longer a home occupation, but it's a commercial business. And that's kind of one of the issues that was that was kind of hard to resolve, even though under the conditions, we allowed the extra people. Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may, I think Councilmember Lillahei is correct. I think that there were two cruxes of what the council's discussion was. One was that one,
Yeah.
was currently, what the planning commission used at the last, when they approved this, was the home occupation piece. And the home occupation piece in the ordinance specifically says it's only to be operated by the occupants of the home. So one way that could easily be addressed is just have a separate section that talks about daycares with more than 12 or 14 kids. The other piece then, that was part of the discussion, was also, okay, so that's one element, but when does something become a commercial use? When does something that's acceptable, on a residential property become unacceptable? What is that threshold? So I think those are the two main things of, sure, we can change the ordinance to address the whole staff problem. But then where is the threshold where something becomes acceptable and then becomes unacceptable because now it's a more commercial use and should be located elsewhere.
And you're talking not only daycare, but any commercial enterprise.
And correct, and I think that's part of what the council directed on last Monday was not just daycares, but also maybe a little global of, I think it was Councilmember Ball made the motion, and that, you know, also looking at what other uses might there be in the ordinance that kind of have that threshold that, you know, if it's done to this level, okay, we might be allowed, but then add two things and now it's not okay. And how do we, and are those, do those things even need to be addressed? Let's, you know, should we identify those things, and then does the commission feel that they should be amended or changed to better fit, you know, where Breezy is today and where we want to be in the future?
I'm confused. Did our action get overturned by the city council?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's what I thought.
So at this point, we're kind of having the discussion that something should be looked at. And then what you're proposing is you may have additional recommendations at a future meeting for us to consider.
Yeah, and the other part of this is that we kind of wanted you to get you thinking. You know, when you can't sleep tomorrow night, just think about ways that maybe the ordinance could be tweaked in order to allow something to happen somewhere.
I know you haven't had much time to do this, but I'm wondering if there's anything in our long-range plan that guides us on this.
I haven't been able to find anything there. Not to say we won't look again.
Unfortunately, with a lot of these discussions, it does get a little philosophical of, you know, what do we want as a community?
Yeah.
You know, again, where are these thresholds?
We certainly saw that in last month's discussion by the community members and Mr. Doty.
Again, as Jerry pointed out, I don't think we're necessarily looking for any answers from you
Right.
tonight, but more of just teasing this, letting you know this is coming, and our plan is to have more specific items and some recommendations for you to consider in June.
And essentially, to kind of boil down a complicated issue here, is city council is responsible for the ordinances. And what they are asking you to do is to do the research, do the discussions, and make recommendations to the city council on how to change the ordinance, as opposed to the city council doing all that work. We're a bunch of lazy people.
With that being said, just while we're talking about this, how does the commission currently feel about the home occupation? Do we have a consensus that we think that there is room to add further clarity? Do we want to keep this on the agenda to talk about at the next meeting or a future meeting to maybe add some clarity?
So it sounds like Jerry and Mark are bringing some wood to the fire, so.
Yes.
Okay, and I would agree, it seems like there's some ambiguity that created confusion, and that's not where we want to be, so. Okay, any further thoughts, discussion before we move? All right, then let's move on to open forum number 2. If anyone would like to come up to speak, this is another opportunity to be heard.
Hi, I'm John Duff, 30672 Rice Creek Drive, just next door to Joe. I wasn't at the last planning commission meeting because I didn't know that this was all going to be discussed. But I helped work with Joe and virtually everybody else in our neighborhood to put together that appeal to the city council and point out, you know, how we felt that it was in violation of our regulations. And I'm glad that they agreed with us. I think we have to, as you're talking about the philosophical things, I mean, nobody is objecting to small daycare centers. Certainly there's a need for that. But we felt that expanding it to 24 or even 30 kids, I think you guys originally were going to offer them, and however many outside employees, 4 or 5 or whatever, that crossed the line into it's a business. This is a commercial business that would be operating in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And you have to play the what-if game. If you were to somehow amend the rules such that that was allowed, how would you like it if in your house, you're living, which is just your family, one neighbor on one side of you says, I'm going to open up a daycare with 30 kids, okay? And then the neighbor on the other side of you says, I'm also going to open up a daycare with 30 kids. And the one across the street, 30 kids. I mean, you have to play the what-if game. If you allow this to happen, that could happen, right? Theoretically, it's possible. And so I think that's the whole reason for these regulations in the first place, limiting it to 14, only the residents of the house, is to keep that sort of thing in a residential neighborhood small in scope. If you are sympathetic to a couple individuals who have very noble goals and are nice people and say, yeah, we want to bend the rules or adjust the rules so that they can do what they want to do, well, that opens the door to lots of other people maybe want to do that. And, like I said, in the same neighborhood. And that could add a lot of traffic. And all of a sudden, is it really a residential neighborhood anymore? If you got all these daycare centers with 24, 30 kids and all these outside employees, you can have a lot of angry residents if you open up the rules so that these commercial businesses, and I know we're talking about daycares and kids and everything, but these are businesses. These are for-profit businesses. So if you open up the rules to that, you could have a lot of angry residents at Breezy Point because it's going to apply to everybody, right? So just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. And after thinking about some of the comments that came up, I wanted to share something that might be helpful too, because I know there was a lot of discussion, a lot of public input. And one thing we didn't talk about was that in a prior meeting, we actually had that group present to us their plan, and we had a pretty robust and lengthy discussion in that meeting, that's public record, that discussed that to a great degree over what do we want to allow, what makes good sense for the community, what was in our intent in kind of looking at what Breezy Point wanted to do from a kind of a overall city plan. And we looked at the comprehensive plan, we discussed that. So there was more discussion than what was witnessed at that meeting. And I just wanted to bring that up because we came to that meeting with a lot of previous debate and research. And so then it was just adding into that the public input and then getting some additional findings from the applicants that we had asked some questions on. They came back during that meeting and supplied. So there was maybe more than what some had thought had gone into it. But I really do appreciate the thoughts that you came up with because I think we can do a better job in the meeting of going through that for everybody that was present, identifying those findings and giving more discussion that maybe wasn't part of that particular meeting that was discussed before. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I think that's a really good idea and a great input. And so thank you guys for doing that. Is there anyone else that wanted to comment or something additional to add to the form? All right.
Hi, Julie Jacobson, 30653 Rice Creek Drive, neighbors to them. New to the community, we moved in just less than a year ago. My understanding and from what I'm hearing from the meetings and from neighbors that area was very thought out when it was made as 5-acre lots. And back in the day, one of the reasons why we moved here was to get out of the city. We were from the St. Cloud area and wanted to get out into the wooded areas. I have to agree with John, good analogy, John, on your neighbors putting in these daycares right next to you and so forth. Granted, there's a lot of room, but that's not why, that's not why it was set up in the first place years ago. And I appreciate that there must have been a lot of work that was put in to make those lots, and it would have had to have been okayed by the council at the time and the planning commission. I'm all for daycare. I've got 2 kids. Our kids went through Montessori school. I love the idea of having the outdoor school. I think that's great. One thing I do think that you need to come up with is it 12 or 14 to be there and then beyond. I am opposed to it just because it is, it is a residential area. I love, I appreciate the work that you've done. It would have been nice to know that you guys had discussed this prior to. I wasn't at that meeting because I didn't know about it, but I did watch the video, and I was kind of appalled. I was very disappointed that people from outside of the community were listened to more than people in the community. It was actually kind of embarrassing. I went back and counted, there was at least 8 to 10 people that have their kids at that daycare. Great. Like I said, I'm a hands-on daycare, supporter. However, when it comes to those kids, they're only going to be there 2 to 4 years, and then they're moving on, where we're going to be here hopefully for a lifetime. So I, really appreciate you, taking those points into consideration also. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other input?
Joe Doty, 30718 Race Creek Drive. Just one thing, there was some discussion about the long-range plan. I technically believe you got the long-range plan right last time. Home occupation is what I think the definition you've made is correct. I feel that's a good definition. Anybody who wants to start a business, husband, wife, whatever it may be, keep it in their home, keep it, kind of percolate, get it going, and maybe you grow and you move on to the next stage, which is kind of where this business is at. They've done well, they've succeeded, they have a unique, very neat idea that's obviously is very passionate, but now it's growing and it's time to move on, and that's exactly why you have your long-range plan, that's why you have your city ordinances the way you do. You set them up, okay, you can start here, but as you grow and as you get bigger and you want to expand, now you need to start thinking about moving to our commercial district, moving where it's more appropriate. And that's, basically, isn't that why we set up our different districts? So that we can start, kind of keep things separate and keep them where they belong. Just my thoughts on that.
Dave,
Thank you.
do you have you okay? Okay.
All right, well, we're going to close open forum number 2. Is there anything on the agenda for other?
No.
All right, well then, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Yep.